was a crisp April morning in 1988 in the quiet town of Lincoln, Vermont. The sun had just started peeking through the fog when 14-year-old Emily Carter buttoned her denim jacket, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and wheeled out her sky blue bicycle. She was the kind of kid everyone in town knew. Smart, shy, always on time for school, and never one to break rules. That morning, she kissed her mom goodbye, promised to be home by 4, and pedaled off down Maplewood Road, her blonde ponytail catching the wind. Her mom stood on the porch for a moment, watching her disappear down the street, not knowing that it would be the last time she'd ever see her daughter alive. By 9 a.m., when Emily still hadn't shown up at Lincoln High, the school secretary made a call home, assuming she was sick. But when Mrs. Carter picked up and said Emily had left more than an hour ago, panic set in fast. Her father left work immediately and retraced her route. That's when they found it. Emily's bike, lying near the side of the old Miller Bridge, the front wheel still slowly turning. One of her white sneakers sat just a few feet away in the gravel, the laces untied. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, no tire marks. Just silence. The kind that feels heavy, like the air itself knows something terrible has happened. Police were called, and within hours the whole town had turned out to search. Helicopters scanned the woods, officers combed the rivers, and volunteers carried flashlights through the fog that night, calling Emily's name over and over again. Someone claimed they saw a red pickup truck idling near the bridge that morning. Another swore they heard a girl scream near the woods behind the old mill. But every lead went cold. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and by the time that summer came around, the posters of Emily's smiling face were sun, faded and curling at the edges. The town of Lincoln began to move on, but for the Carters, the world had stopped the moment that bike hit the ground. As the years rolled by, Lincoln, Vermont, slowly began to bury its grief under the weight of time. The posters were taken down, the search parties faded, and the Carter family home, once filled with laughter, birthday balloons, and the smell of pancakes on Saturday mornings, became a silent monument to loss. By 1995, Emily's room was still exactly the same, her trophies on the shelf, her school books on the desk, a half-finished drawing still taped to the wall. Her parents, Laura and Thomas Carter, barely spoke anymore. Laura spent most days sitting on the porch swing, staring down the road Emily used to ride her bike on. Thomas threw himself into work, trying to keep from breaking apart. But grief doesn't stay quiet forever. In 1998, after 10 long years of unanswered questions, the Carters packed what little they could bear to keep and left town for good. The old Carter farmhouse sat abandoned for nearly 3 years, weathered by the Vermont winters and the gossip that never really stopped. Teenagers dared each other to sneak inside, whispering about the girl who vanished. Some claimed to see lights flickering in the windows or hear the sound of a bicycle chain rattling late at night. But mostly, people just avoided the place. It stood there on Old Mill Road, a relic of a tragedy no one wanted to remember. When the Hendersons, a young couple from Boston, bought it in 2001, the locals were relieved. They were friendly, hopeful, and had big plans. They wanted to turn the crumbling basement into a wine cellar, maybe even start their own small vineyard. For the first time in years, it seemed like the house might finally get a second chance. Renovations started in early spring of 2002. Contractors came and went, tearing down old walls, sanding the floors, replacing everything that had been touched by time or memory. The basement was last on their list, dark, cold, and still carrying the faint smell of mildew and something older, something no one could quite place. It was during one of those long renovation days when a worker noticed something strange. Every time he tapped a certain section of the back wall, it made a hollow sound, as if there was space behind it. The blueprints showed no hidden room, no crawl space, nothing that should have been there. When he told the Hendersons, they laughed at first, thinking it was just old construction quirks. But that night, Mrs. Henderson said she could have sworn she heard a faint thud coming from the basement, like something shifting behind the wall. The next morning, the crew returned to finish the basement, still talking about that hollow sound behind the wall. The foreman decided to check it properly this time. He grabbed a hammer and tapped across the bricks until, once again, that empty echo rang out, dull, deep, and wrong. The Hendersons came down to watch, half curious, half uneasy. They stood at the foot of the stairs, shivering slightly in the chill. The walls were old, rough red brick with dark stains that time had baked into them. Finally, the foreman swung the hammer and knocked through the spot. A chunk of brick fell loose, releasing a puff of cold, dusty air that smelled of rotten metal. Behind the hole, the beam of his flashlight revealed darkness, not solid earth or stone, but a narrow passageway that seemed to stretch beyond what the light could reach. By late afternoon, they'd widened the hole enough to crawl through. The moment the air shifted, everyone felt it. That heavy, suffocating stillness, like stepping into a place that hasn't been touched by life for decades. Inside, the room was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with rough concrete floors and low ceilings supported by wooden beams blackened from moisture. An old light bulb dangled from a frayed cord overhead, flickering faintly when they flipped the switch at the doorway. It still worked, somehow. Scattered around were dusty wine bottles, some cracked and empty, others sealed but covered in a thick layer of grime. There was a single wooden chair in the center, one leg broken, lying on its side, and leaning against the far wall, half buried under old rags and debris, was what looked like the rim of a bicycle wheel. No one said a word. The workers just stared, unsure whether they'd stumbled upon some forgotten storage space or something else entirely. The air was heavy with an acidic, sour smell, not just mildew, but something worse, something that clung to the throat. One of the men took a step forward and kicked at the pile of rags near the wheel. That's when he froze. Beneath the fabric was something pale. Not the color of fabric, but bone. He stumbled back, whispering that it was just a mannequin, but deep down, everyone already knew. Mrs. Henderson screamed for someone to call the police. Within minutes, the basement was sealed off, sirens blaring in the distance. When investigators arrived and shone their flashlights inside that hidden room, their faces changed instantly. What they found under those old cloths wasn't a mannequin. It was the remains of a young girl, curled up near the wall, her small frame still wearing a faded Lincoln High jacket, one the police hadn't seen since 1988. By the next morning, Lincoln, Vermont was swarming with reporters, police cars, and flashing lights that painted the quiet neighborhood in red and blue. Forensic teams in white suits moved in and out of the Hendersons' basement like ghosts, carrying bags of evidence and snapping photos of every inch of that hidden cellar. The coroner confirmed what everyone had feared. The remains belonged to a female teenager, estimated to have died sometime between 1988 and 1990. But it wasn't until the DNA results came back that the truth finally began to surface. The skeleton found behind the wine cellar wall was Emily Carter, 14 years after she vanished on her way to school. She had been resting less than 50 feet from her old bedroom, right beneath the home her parents had once tried so hard to fill with laughter. The discovery sent shockwaves through Lincoln, reopening wounds that had never really healed. Detectives combed through old case files, eyewitness reports, and forensic notes that hadn't been touched since the late 80s. What they found painted a deeply unsettling picture. A partial DNA match from evidence collected in the cellar pointed to a man named George Miller, a local handyman who had lived next door to the Carters at the time of Emily's disappearance. He'd been a friendly face around town, quiet, polite, always ready to help fix a broken fence or shovel a neighbor's driveway. The Carters had even hired him several times to do odd jobs around their property. But when investigators looked deeper, they found something disturbing. George had a criminal record in another state, a history of trespassing and unlawful restraint that had somehow slipped through the cracks. He died in 1997, long before Emily's body was found, taking his secrets to the grave. When police searched through the Old Town records, they made another chilling discovery. George Miller was the contractor who had built the Carter family's wine cellar in 1986, the same one where Emily's remains were found. He had access, the tools, and the opportunity. Old invoices showed he had worked in that basement alone for nearly 2 weeks, often staying late into the evening. Neighbors remembered seeing his red pickup truck parked outside the Carter home during that time. The same kind of truck witnesses reported near the bridge the morning Emily vanished. Every piece of evidence pointed back to him. But there was something that didn't make sense. Something that made detectives pause. When the cellar was finally mapped and reconstructed, they realized the door had been sealed shut from the inside, not the outside. It wasn't a trapdoor or a locked entrance. It was a brick wall built inward, as if someone had been desperately trying to keep something out or lock themselves in. The revelation about the wine cellar being sealed from the inside sent a ripple of confusion through the entire investigation. Detectives went back down there, crawling through that narrow, claustrophobic opening, their flashlights slicing through the stale darkness. The air was colder now, maybe from the broken foundation or maybe from something else. On the inside wall, near where Emily's body had been found, they noticed faint scratch marks on the concrete, uneven, frantic, and small, like someone clawing in desperation. Near them, partially hidden under a piece of rotted wood, was something else, a rusted bolt attached to a broken metal latch. The lock mechanism was old-fashioned, bolted shut from within. It didn't take long to realize what that meant. Whoever had closed that cellar, whether George Miller or Emily herself, had done it from the inside. The idea was impossible, horrifying. If Miller had trapped her there, why seal it that way? And if Emily had done it herself, what had she been trying to escape from? Detectives searched every inch of that room for answers. They found a few personal items, a small hair clip, a faded notebook page with half-erased writing, and one of Emily's bracelets, broken in half. But what caught their attention most was something subtle: the position of the remains. Emily hadn't been bound. There were no ropes, no signs of restraint. Her body had been found sitting against the wall, knees pulled close to her chest, as if she'd been waiting or hiding. The coroner's report suggested she hadn't died instantly. There were traces of fingernail scratches on the inner bricks and faint impressions that looked she had tried to dig through the mortar. The timeline suggested she may have been alive for hours, maybe days before her body finally gave out. The thought of that, of a terrified teenage girl trapped in the dark beneath her own home while the world searched above, made even the most hardened officers step away in silence. After the discovery, townspeople began to share things they'd long buried. Some recalled how George Miller had complained about hearing strange noises in his house years ago, whispering sounds that came through the pipes at night. Others remembered that, not long after Emily disappeared, he'd suddenly bricked off part of his basement, claiming it was for moisture control. But no one had ever questioned it back then. The police theorized that Miller may have kidnapped Emily, hidden her in that wine cellar, and then, for reasons unknown, sealed her in and fled. But the more they examined the layout of the basement, the less sense it made. There were no external locks, no place for him to leave and then seal the wall behind him, which left only one horrifying possibility: that Emily, in her final moments, had somehow bricked herself in, or that someone or something had been down there with her. Weeks later, the Hendersons moved out, unable to stay another night in that house. The cellar was sealed again, this time permanently. Concrete poured over the entrance so no one could ever open it again. But even then, workers swore they heard something while closing it up, a faint tapping sound from behind the wall, slow and steady, like knuckles brushing against brick. Investigators brushed it off as air pressure, but the men who heard it still refused to go near that property after dark. The Carter family returned briefly when Emily's remains were released. Laura Carter stood in front of the old farmhouse one last time, clutching a photo of her daughter, the same one used on the missing posters back in 1988. She said she could still feel Emily there, as if part of her soul had never left that place. When she walked toward the old porch, a gust of cold wind rushed through the open doorway, and the sound of a bicycle bell faintly echoed through the hall. Clear, soft, and impossible. The detectives heard it too, but when they searched, there was nothing. Today, no one lives on Old Mill Road anymore. The property sits abandoned, vines creeping over the windows, the cellar sealed beneath layers of concrete and memory. Locals say if you drive by late at night, you can sometimes see a dim light flickering under the ground, or hear the distant ring of a bicycle bell carried on the wind, a reminder that not all mysteries stay buried, because somewhere beneath that farmhouse, in the silence of the earth, Emily Carter's ride to school never truly ended.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.